Hello and welcome to this special program on the occasion of Insulin Appreciation Day. I'm Archana Shukla, and with me today are Dr. Ambrish Mittal, Chairman and Head of Endocrinology and Diabetes Department at Max Healthcare, and Dr. V. Mohan, Chairman, Dr. Mohan's Diabetes Specialty Center and President of Madras Diabetes Research Foundation, Chennai. Joining them is a very special guest, our former cricketer and brand ambassador for Novo Nordisk, Mr. Anil Kumble. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on this chat about how to deal with insulin management and how important it is to break barriers with insulin. First of all, I'll come to Dr. Mittal. Sir, we've seen that every diabetic does not need an insulin. We've seen advancements, we've seen research that proves that not every diabetic needs to be put on artificial or human insulin, but for those who have to make that transition, there is a lot of resistance that comes from patients. They feel they would be dependent. How does one deal with that resistance that comes from the patients?
I think starting insulin early or starting insulin when it's required remains a challenge, although it has improved a lot over the last few years with the effort of doctors and educators and industry combined. Basically, type 2 diabetes means insulin resistance and insulin deficiency. So for the resistance part, you have many medications and you also have medicines that stimulate insulin secretion. But even in type 2 diabetes, a stage is reached sooner or later where that insulin that is being made in the body or with the help of oral medication is not sufficient, and you actually need to replace insulin to control your blood glucose. So that is a natural process of diabetes. I mean, it may happen early in some, late in some may be able to avoid it, but there should be no resistance to taking insulin as a treatment. The reason for the resistance is, there are several, but there are two very broad reasons. Number one is the fact that people think they will become addicted to insulin. They think it's something they will become dependent on very quickly. Now, that is not really the case. If your body is capable of responding and making insulin again in the required amounts, you will be able to get off insulin, as you can see in pregnancy, in people undergoing surgical procedures, even otherwise, even other diabetics who become very careful. People who undergo bariatric surgery, for example, can often go off insulin. So insulin is not irreversible. That's number one. The other challenge with insulin is the fact that after all, it's injectable as of today. So there is this huge thing about moving from tablets to injections. And these are the two huge barriers that we have to surmount. But I think that with greater education, greater awareness, we are generally able to cross these barriers, maybe not in the first sitting with the patient, but over one or two sittings, 2 or 3 sittings, we can often cross these barriers. We should not run away from insulin if our doctor recommends. That's really important, because good glucose control, if you're compromising on your glucose control because you want to avoid insulin, you're really doing yourself a lot of harm.
Right. Let me bring in now Mr. Kumble into the conversation. Mr. Kumble, you've associated yourself for the last few years with the cause of spreading awareness about diabetes management. You also were telling me earlier that you have had people in the family who were living with diabetes. In your assessment of seeing the disease up close in your family itself and in interaction in the last few years with people, what do you think is the biggest challenge that holds people back when it comes to getting onto a therapy like that of insulin or overall managing diabetes?
I think it's just the awareness. Basically, we need to start creating awareness, and also, we tend to. I mean, it's but natural that we tend to sort of put things off for another day. We are used to it. Let's do this tomorrow. I think that's something that you cannot do when you have diabetes. I think it's very essential that you go and get it tested, and once you know that you are insulin dependent, I think it's all the more that you need to monitor it regularly. And it's not just the patient, it's not just the person who has diabetes, it's also about the doctor. I think both doctor and the patient, it's a common goal for both of them. I think it's important that they need to sort of live through the journey and keep monitoring one's insulin levels. And it's pretty easy once you get used to it. I've seen within the family it's quite easy to manage that. It's just about being disciplined, and it's just about being efficient in the way you manage and control it. And with that, I think it's pretty easy to lead a normal life. One important aspect is the lack of awareness that generally is the case in diabetes.
Right. And being a sportsman, you bring to the table the need for managing your diet and your exercise regimes to effectively manage diabetes, which is largely a lifestyle disease because of the sedentary lifestyles that people live and the changes in our food habits, etc. But Mr. Kumble, in the last 4 months, we've seen our lives go really haywire. We are living a very less agile lives now, especially because of the lockdown. Our exercise regimes have gone pretty haywire. How do you suggest and advise people to manage their routines now, so that just because of the lockdown, because of the COVID-19, you're not losing sight of how to manage diabetes?
No, I think it's whether you have diabetes or not. I think managing diet and exercise is something that has to be there. It needs to be a part of your lifestyle. And that's the reason that I have, I've come on board as an ambassador to create awareness largely because, I've seen that non-contagious diseases in India certainly lack awareness, and diabetes is one. So it's important that, during these times, I know it's quite a challenge. It's a massive challenge for all of us because the last 4 months, more often than not, we are sitting at home, and sitting at home is the major activity. So that's something that you need to consciously change. So maybe stand up and walk around within the house, within the compound wall, and diet. It cannot be your normal diet that one had 4 months ago when the activity was a lot more. So that's the kind of management that one needs to have. And there are enough exercises that you can manage within the homes. It could be yoga, it could be just standing and doing a march past. If you have access to some sort of equipment within the house, you can use that. And then just general chores around the house itself keeps you active. I think it's important to keep yourself active and manage the diet. It cannot be the same diet that one was having 4 months ago when the activity was a lot more. So it's just being aware of what one needs to do for being disciplined. I think that if you can bring in, it's pretty easy to manage.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Mohan, Mr. Kumble has put it very nicely that one needs to be aware of what you're doing, especially in the last 4 months where, we've not been living a very normal, ideal life that we had. But have you as an endocrinologist seen a significant change in the way people have managed their diabetes, or as far as compliance with their insulin regimes are concerned? Things have changed. We are not seeing regular clinics. You're not seeing your patients in your regular OPDs. How has, with all this disruption, have you seen a change with the way patients are managing their insulin regimes and diabetes management?
Thank you for that question. And it's interesting because we have done a big study on this, and we just published it 3 weeks ago in an American journal, Diabetes Technology and Therapeutics. So we asked the question, first of all, we said, let's go back to our patients, a large number of them. So what we did was we took people who had come within the last 6 months to a year before the lockdown. And out of a sample of about 30,000 patients who had come to us, we said, let's pick a random sample of 3,000 patients across the country. As you know, we have branches all over the country. We have 48 branches in some 9 states of India. So to make it representative, we picked people from different places, Delhi, Calcutta, Orissa, and other places, of course, the southern states as well. And we went back to them and said, what did you do during this lockdown? First of all, how did your diet, how was it affected? Positively, negatively? Exercise, as Mr. Kumble said, very difficult to achieve your pre-COVID level exercise. We have to be very, very motivated to do that. Of course, we're lucky, as he mentioned, to have a treadmill or something. Then you can build it up. But for common man, it's not easy. When you live in a flat with just 2 rooms, it's not easy. Having said that, in a house like mine, it's very easy to do, but I cannot expect everyone to do that. So that's the other thing that we asked. We also asked about their tablets and insulin availability, and finally, their testing. Did you test less? Now, there was a prediction based on some mathematical model that the sugar is going to go completely haywire, and somebody had an A1C, it will go up by 4%, 8%. So somebody had HbA1c of 8, it will go to 12, 16. That was a projection mathematically that was done by some colleagues from India, actually.
Let me bring in Dr. Amrish Mittal onto this point. Dr. Mittal, have you seen a similar sort of patient compliance going up as far as their insulin management is concerned, diabetes management is concerned, as far as their sugar levels are concerned? Have you seen a similar move with your patients as well?
So, Archana, I've seen two kinds of moves. There is a group of patients who have just shut themselves off. They're neither testing nor doing anything, and suddenly one day they start testing and find everything's gone haywire. So there is that group of patients also. On the other hand, those who are aware about their diabetes and those who are into it in that sense, they when they read the kind of news that Dr. Mohan was talking about, they are highly motivated. And also some of my patients have much more time to look after themselves. Very busy businessmen or executives suddenly have time at home. They can do their gym properly, they can do their treadmill properly, they can, they have a more regulated life. Actually, it's the reverse. So overall, I would say that people's compliance, for example, for starting insulin, has improved substantially. Nowadays, people are, because they are scared of getting a COVID the next week or the next day, they are much more compliant to taking insulin to control their blood glucose and escape COVID. Then they would be, say, worrying about a heart attack 20 years from now or a kidney failure 30 years from now. So I have found conversion to insulin surprisingly easy during this period. And as Dr. Mohan said, even with the use of increasing use of telemedicine, we have found considerable benefit, especially for those patients who live far away. We've sort of tried to make the system as smooth as possible. And yes, it will definitely be a hybrid model because there is no way you can replace the personal feel. In chronic care, patients are our friends. Sometimes they're like family. You can't build that relationship over telemedicine in the long run. So it will definitely be a mix of both things. But COVID has made us realize that for people with diabetes or people with chronic disorders, telemedicine is a good option that can be used. And even convincing people to move towards better treatments or adding insulin has in many cases become easier in this era.
Right. That's a pretty interesting insight, which is very different from what was anticipated COVID-19 will bring on the table, which is higher glucose levels and maybe another set of a epidemic as far as increased number of diabetics is concerned. And this insight is really useful to understand how COVID-19 has actually, we may say that the fear and insecurities that people living with diabetes has is a negative thing, but somewhere it has helped them manage their own insulin management and diabetes much better during the COVID-19. And this is what I would take back, from this conversation. But Dr. Mohan, I want to also understand from the research and innovation perspective as far as insulin is concerned. We've seen some of the most highest level of advancements come in the type of insulins that are, now available in the market. Earlier, what, people used to prick themselves for like 3 times or 4 times during the day. Now you have insulins that work for 24 hours, 36 hours. We have one that work for a week more. We have inhaled ones. How has it made patient compliance better? The newer innovation in insulin, how has that made patient compliance better?
Thank you for that. So to answer your question, while it is true that what we call as the basal insulins, which means those that work for a long time, have got longer and longer. So earlier we didn't have insulin more than say 12 hours. And then came the kind of 16, 18-hour insulin. And now there are, as you rightly said, molecules which are in trial stage. The weekly ones hasn't come yet, but the clinical trials have just started. Weekly GLP-1 receptor analogs have already come. But weekly insulin is also is now being under trial. We are also part of that, and it is likely to come.
Dr. Mittal, as far as newer advancements in insulin is concerned, there have been significant development and innovations in the delivery models also, from from those painful syringes we are now to very smooth moving small syringes, to pens, to pumps, etc. What in your sense is the benefit that the patients are getting right now, and what more can they look forward to?
I think that scene has changed drastically actually over the years. As you yourself pointed out, there was a time when maybe Mohan and I were undergrads when you had to fill those syringes, and even the needles were scarce, and it was pretty tough job to manage diabetes with insulin. Gradually, those syringes became much easier, much more smooth, much more user friendly. But then ultimately, it is pens that have taken over. And the modern insulin pens, with each successive generation of pens, have such fine needles. And the prick is, it's really hardly painful. It's just like a barrier you have to cross, more an emotional barrier than a physical barrier. And therefore, the usage of pens is now commonplace. And usage of pens has clearly made it easy for every patient. And you can do any number of studies that have shown that patients prefer pens to syringes. No question about that. So making it easy and self-administering, making you independent, unless you're really in that age group, or you have a vision problem, or you have some arthritic problem. Otherwise, most people take their insulin themselves, including children. So that's a big advance. Now move further from that, you're going to things like insulin pumps. So insulin pumps are basically insulin delivery devices that deliver insulin at a constant rate. You can set the basal rate that Dr. Mohan was talking about. The basal insulin will give one rate through for 24, 36 hours. Now, with the pump, you can set the basal infusion rates maybe to be lower at night and maybe to be higher in the day. Those kind of adjustments automatically. Once you program it, it'll do that. And then they have buttons by which you can actually press and take the pre-meal requirement. So the pricks are all gone. And then in that, now you have inbuilt sensors, or you have attached sensors, which will actually sense the glucose and then deliver the insulin. So you have a closed loop system also that has to be programmed by the doctor. But still, the truth is that you are on the way to, especially for type 1s, who require insulin for survival. Pumps have been a huge asset. In my practice, I find that by the time the kids are slightly older, able to take care of themselves, they are very, very good with the pump and helps them achieve whatever they want in their professional life. But not everyone needs pumps.
Mr. Kumble, just comment on this aspect of this psychological management, that you need to be prepared and ready to get onto this path of using insulin for managing your diabetes, along with taking care of your diet and your exercises. We are seeing now that, diabetes is no longer an urban disease. We are seeing a fast rise across rural India as well. By the last count, more than 73 million people in India were diabetic, and over 5.6 million are on insulin, and the numbers are rising fast even in rural India. How do we transition? How do we bring that awareness, in smaller markets, in small towns, in rural India, for people to be aware and people to get onto this sort of a regime that will help them lead a much normal life like they were living earlier?
Yeah, I think, Archana, you sort of answered yourself in the question itself that, it's not just an urban problem now. Sedentary lifestyle has sort of reached to the smaller cities and now to villages as well. And I think with the kind of mobile integrations that have happened in India, it's a lot easier to create an awareness program now. But having said that, even food habits over the last probably 15, 20 years have changed in the rural setup as well. It's no longer what it used to be. So that's the biggest change that one sees. And as more and more people sort of come to the cities and then go back, they not necessarily bring their lifestyle into the cities. It's the other way around. So that's the difference that one sees now. And I think, I'm hopeful that in the last 4 months, like both the doctors here, Dr. Mohan and Dr. Mittal, have mentioned that patients have been a lot more, very efficient in the way they have managed, is because they have controlled their diet. They've been able to manage their lifestyle much better, and perhaps gone back to their old routes of managing their own diet as well, not necessarily calling up for a packed food. You're eating better food at home, and that to me is the biggest difference. And hopefully, the urban population will also realize that going forward post-COVID, that it's more essential for you to have a healthy food rather than a packed food that comes in and then starts, filtering into the system. So that's exactly what has happened even in the smaller cities and then rural India as well, where you see a lot more packed food, not necessarily that it was there 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So yes, it's a lifestyle change, that it's not necessary that it needs to be for the urban people, but it's also for the village and smaller towns. So hopefully the awareness campaigns that we have created will reach to them, and then you play a big role as well as television, media, to reach out to these population to test regularly. And I don't think the barrier is oneself. More often than not, you're the barrier, not necessarily that it's somebody else. With the kind of support that you have around with the family and friends and the doctors. And with insulin, I think one can easily lead a normal life.
Right. I'm really running short on time on this show, but I would want to take one quick view from Mr. Mittal on the diabetes for younger people and how important it is for them also to move on to an insulin management platform. Or do you think younger people, because we are also seeing a fast rise in diabetes in people under the age of 40, under the age of 35. So how important it is to manage their diabetes with diet and exercise, or do they also need to move quickly onto an insulin pathway?
So I think when we talk of younger people, we have to divide into two, and we won't go into type 1. For type 1, insulin is a matter of survival, and they have to take insulin. Those are insulin dependent people. But we are seeing a lot of type 2 or the adult type of diabetes, as you described, in younger people now. And that's really dangerous. And that's the truth, because they will be exposed. They have to live with this diabetes for decades together. So their complication risks are higher. Their chances of the organs getting infected are higher, and there is data to show that they move more rapidly towards insulin, especially Indians. We tend to leave our beta cell function, insulin secretory function goes down rapidly. So the answer is the same: lifestyle measures, control your glucose, use oral antidiabetics as advised, make sure you hit the target. Sit with your doctor and understand, what is my HbA1c target, what is my blood sugar target, what is my cholesterol target, what is my blood pressure target. If you do the A, B, C properly, A1c, blood pressure, cholesterol, at any age, you will protect yourself forever from the ill effects of diabetes. If it requires insulin, so be it.
Right. If it requires insulin, so be it. Well, gentlemen, Dr. Ambrish Mittal, Dr. V. Mohan, and Mr. Anil Kumble, thank you so much for sparing time for this special discussion, something where we need to create more awareness about diabetes, which is slowly becoming a silent killer, and how insulin can be a lifesaver. But one thing that is my takeaway from this conversation is, one, COVID has thrown open a positive side for diabetics. They are managing their diabetes better. And secondly, diet and exercise will come a long way in helping people live a more normal life with diabetes. Many thanks for watching this special edition. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18.